institutions will come to order. Without objection, the chairman is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is titled Evaluating the Operations of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chairman for inclusion in the record. Today is the committee's annual oversight hearing on CFIUS and will provide members an opportunity to review the Trump administration's implementation of the CFIUS process and the outbound investment security program, both of which are administered by the Office of Investment Security. The United States is the world's top destination for foreign direct investment, with over $5.7 trillion in total investment so far and trillions of dollars of new commitments during this President Trump's current term. Our open investment environment makes this possible, which is why successive presidents have reaffirmed its importance. In fact, foreign direct investment accounts for 10% or more of jobs, while foreign firms employ around 25% of all manufacturing workers, making investment critical to the well-being of Americans across the country. Established in 1975 under the Department of Treasury, CFIUS seeks to preserve this open investment environment while ensuring that the very openness does not become a weapon our adversaries could use against us. The 2018 Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, otherwise known as FIRMA, expanded its jurisdiction to include non-controlling investments in critical technologies, infrastructure, and sensitive personal data. CFIUS must rigorously scrutinize foreign investments from any source that could undermine our technology, agriculture, energy sectors, and more, while enabling beneficial investments and inflows that do strengthen our economy. At the same time, CFIUS must not become so bureaucratic that the process prioritizes answering every conceivable question over neutralizing threats. So with this in mind, I want to commend President Trump both for his America First investment policy, which reiterates his commitment to welcoming foreign investment, as well as his tireless efforts to secure trillions in new investment in our country. I especially want to highlight CFIUS's Known Investor Portal pilot program, which promises to streamline investment for repeat friendly investors, allowing resources to be directed where they matter most for screening new risks. However, reviewing inbound investments alone cannot fully protect our national security. This is why Congress enacted Representative Barr's COINS Act last month as part of the NDAA, which tasks the Office of Investment Security to build on the outbound investment security program. Now that this legislation has become law, it falls on this committee to ensure that it is implemented in a targeted and thoughtful manner, while ensuring that American capital does not support military industrial bases of our adversaries, particularly the People's Republic of China. As Treasury writes an updated outbound investment rule, it's imperative that it's clear, streamlined framework so that it can ensure American investors can comply without overly burdensome bureaucratic obstacles that halts our financial sector. As the world becomes more complex and interconnected, OIS must ensure that U.S. national security is protected both to inbound and in outbound investment fronts. And ensuring that our processes are efficient and effective means investment screening must be transparent and clear for our friends and fellow citizens to comply with, and difficult for our adversaries to exploit. This is our task today. I yield back, and I now recognize the ranking member for her remarks.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our Assistant Secretary for being here today, fresh on the job. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, plays a pivotal role in our national security framework by ensuring that foreign direct investment transactions do not pose a threat to the United States while maintaining an open investment environment. Although CFIUS has only blocked a handful of transactions to date, its thorough vetting process is essential to protect our national security. The businesses that participate in that process rely on its clear and fair rules. Unfortunately, under President Trump, the CFIUS review process has become unpredictable and turned into a political tool used to punish his opponents while enriching himself, his family, and his billionaire friends. We saw this with TikTok, where he exploited tangible security concerns for personal and political leverage. We saw this with the Nippon Steel U.S. Steel deal, where he inserted his own name and operational controls into the new company's articles of incorporation. And since taking office, we've seen it with his crypto ventures involving foreign actors that have increased his personal net worth by billions. This repeated and blatant abuse of power does not make America safer. It only creates confusion for businesses, it scares investors, and weakens our ability to compete with adversaries like China. Every member of this subcommittee should be concerned about the president's activities and the national security risks they create, particularly on the heels of last summer's hearing, where we all agreed on the importance of a clean investment security process. We must preserve the integrity of CFIUS and ensure our national security tools remain protected and well-resourced. That includes reinstating the bipartisan-supported Corporate Transparency Act rule to help national security programs like CFIUS combat anonymous shell companies used to obscure the true ownership and control beyond covered transactions. This administration and some of my colleagues across the aisle are determined to undercut this bipartisan law, which will only make it harder for CFIUS, the outbound security program, financial institutions, and national security agencies to properly assess national security risks. And certainly we are here because of the very nature of the name of this committee, that we are committed and obligated to protect our national securities. And lastly, politics has no place in matters of national securities, and Democrats will continue to resist efforts that would either undercut CFIUS or distort its purpose. Since our last hearing on investment security, the Comprehensive Outbound Investment National Security, or as we refer to, COINS Act, was signed into law, codifying the expanding and outbound investment program. So welcome, and we'll be watching the implementations of this law closely. I look forward to learning more about our investment security framework and operating and exploring ways that we can strengthen it. Thank you again for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this committee, and I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Hill, for 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Davidson, and welcome, Secretary Pilkington. We're glad to have you today. Congratulations. CFIUS plays a critical role in safeguarding the national security while also fostering, here in the United States, an open investment climate. Today, we're examining how its expanded authority under FIRMA impacts U.S. investment in emergency security challenges. CFIUS continues to evolve to address national security threats from abroad. At the same time, CFIUS's narrow mission supports the confidence investors have in the openness and integrity of the U.S. economy. As with any national security program, ongoing oversight and evaluation of CFIUS's effectiveness are essential duties for the members of Congress and particularly this committee. Our discussion will focus on evaluating CFIUS's role in protecting national security while upholding that open investment climate. CFIUS has earned bipartisan support by sticking to this mission. It does not and must not allow itself to become a tool for industrial policy and partisan agendas. I thank the witness for being here today, and I look forward to our discussion. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. Today we welcome the testimony of the Honorable Chris Pilkington, Assistant Secretary for Investment Security at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Assistant Secretary Pilkington, thank you for taking time to be here today. Congratulations on your confirmation. You'll be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your written testimony. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. Assistant Secretary Pilkington, you are now recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Hill, Chairman Davidson, Ranking Member Beatty, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here to testify today to provide an update on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. I come before you today having been sworn in as the Assistant Treasury Secretary for Investment Security just over a week ago on January 5th. But while I am new to this role, CFIUS is currently celebrating its 50th anniversary, and I humbly accept this important charge to safeguard our country's national security while ensuring that America continues to be the world's greatest destination for investment. In his America First investment policy, President Trump committed to maintaining a strong and open investment environment coupled with critical national security protections. The President's tireless work on behalf of the American people is driving trillions of dollars of investment commitments into America, bolstering our superior commercial innovations and technologies, creating jobs, building communities, and providing opportunities for many Americans. As I'm sure you are all aware, the CFIUS annual report to Congress provides a more comprehensive picture of the committee's work, so I'd like to use my statement here to share just some of the key program goals for 2026. First and foremost, CFIUS's core priority remains assessing and addressing any national security risks that arise from transactions that fall within its jurisdiction. By evaluating these potential threats from adversarial actors, the committee's many interagency participants, including subject matter experts, law enforcement, and the intelligence community, serve as important gatekeepers to protect our homeland. The commitment to this guiding principle must always lead the committee's work. Second, process efficiencies and stakeholder communication will be an important part of CFIUS. While the national security risk assessments must be thorough and dependable and will always serve as the touchstone of the program, we understand that unnecessary delays and overburdensome procedures can potentially reduce investment and limit the opportunity for job creation and local economic impact. In this spirit, as set forth in the America First investment policy, President Trump directed CFIUS to create an expedited fast-track process to facilitate greater investment from allies and partners, which we are now piloting as the Known Investor Program. This is the first iteration of a program that will seek to collect detailed information from foreign investors in advance of potential transactions so we can maximize administrative efficiencies while still adhering to the integrity of process, including robust due diligence and tailored actions where necessary to protect national security. We intend to build upon this pilot over the course of this year and look forward to working with relevant parties to ensure its success. Third, as Congress directed, filing certain types of transactions with CFIUS is mandatory, and the committee has the authority to review any transaction not voluntarily filed with CFIUS that is covered by its jurisdiction and may raise national security considerations. Accordingly, CFIUS is focused on ensuring transaction parties comply with the mandatory filing requirement, and we're prepared to act if they fail to do so. When in doubt, we encourage parties to engage proactively with CFIUS and utilize the committee as a resource in these circumstances, as addressing national security risks is typically easier for all parties involved before a transaction is closed than after. Fourth, building on the benefits of foreign investment, which include increased jobs, wages, research and development, exports, and many more, in line with CFIUS's mandates to educate the business community and strengthen national security, we want to work with industry to better understand their supply chain and vendor needs so we can work with interagency partners such as Select USA, the U.S. Small Business Administration, and the Department of War's Office for Industrial-Based Policy, as well as the private sector, to better inform their deployment of capital to build secure and resilient sources of supply right here in the United States. Fifth, as Congress set forth in the Foreign Investment Risk Modernization Act in 2018, CFIUS will continue to actively work with allies and partners on their own investment security programs. This engagement to date has led to the establishment and enhancement of dozens of investment screening mechanisms around the world and will remain an important tool as this administration engages the global community on critical economic and national security issues. This work will be coupled with the insights of our growing team of subject matter experts, scientists, and engineers to ensure we stay ahead of global technology trends and potential threats. CFIUS will continue to review the committee's processes, practices, and authorities to ensure that we are well equipped to address existing and evolving threats that can accompany foreign investment while preserving the United States' strong and open investment environment. Thank you again for inviting me to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now turn to member questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I support President Trump's February national security presidential memorandum, which makes clear that the United States can and must encourage foreign investment while rigorously protecting our own national security. The memorandum reaffirms a core principle of America's economic leadership. We remain open for business to our allies and trusted partners, but we will not allow adversaries to exploit our openness to undermine our technological edge, our supply chains, or our overwhelming military superiority. That balance, speed for trusted investors, scrutiny for adversaries, is essential if we want the United States to remain the world's top destination for investment while keeping our national security front and center. And I hope that we grow our friends, grow our allies, and diminish our enemies in this process. But with the surge of commitments in foreign direct investment, efficiency becomes even more important. So in May, CFIUS launched the Known Investor Portal. Mr. Secretary, how will you and your team ensure that information collected by the portal actually expedites reviews without becoming just another bureaucratic process?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that predictability, durability, and efficiency of the process is absolutely critical. The Known Investor Program, which is tied back to the fast track concept in the America First investment policy, is currently under pilot. We are in the process of gathering information and learning new information to ensure that that process is as efficient as it possibly can be. In fact, we are going to be releasing soon a request for information from the public as well to get a sense from a whole variety of stakeholders so we can ensure that we're accounting for all of that. Under my leadership, it will not be just another bureaucratic exercise. The purpose of this exercise is to get as much data as possible so that as we conduct our national security reviews, we can have a very good understanding of the parties that we're conducting transactions with and their intentions.
Thank you so much. In CFIUS's annual report for 2024, it states that the committee, quote, identified and considered thousands of potential non-notified transactions. Do you know how CFIUS calculated the thousands number, and are you satisfied with the number of voluntary filings you received? I think the concern is there a type of transaction that's not where you're not being notified at CFIUS? So what steps can Congress do to shore that up, or what are your concerns as you come into this role?
Thank you for the question. As I alluded to in my opening statement, we can't conduct national security reviews of transactions that we don't know about. So non-notified transactions are going to be a priority for this administration. There's various sources that we can identify these through: open source activities, referrals, intelligence community, law enforcement. But one of the things that I intend to do is be able to travel and share some information about CFIUS and the program writ large with the communities and with the country so that we can inform folks, so we can get more information about non-notifieds. The important thing to recognize about non-notified transactions, as I said in my earlier statement, is if we find out about them, then we can work with the parties to see if there is a way to get to mitigation or get to a potential transaction.
Yeah, thank you. And as we look forward to the challenge of looking at outbound screening as well, one of the concerns is even on the current inbound process, it seems like every year it gets more complex and less transparent, and sometimes takes longer. So to what extent is Treasury playing kind of quality control and making sure these are relevant questions? And at some level, they kind of have to be unique to the situation, even if it's a known investor. This particular investment is got its own criteria to some extent. How do you get, I guess, efficient at operating that? Because that's, I think, a concern a lot of folks in industry have, is that it's inconsistent or not a very efficient process.
Thank you very much for the question. While I've just been in the office for about a week, I already have a big whiteboard in my office that says process, process, process. And I want to make sure that we are minimizing the inefficiencies in the process and hearing from the public and the stakeholders to ensure that the information that we're asking for is certainly consistent with what we need to make this decision. We engage very closely with the intelligence community, law enforcement, and of course the other committee members to make sure the information that we're gathering is useful to them. So I think that will be sort of an ever-growing process. But once again, I take your point that efficiency is critical for the predictability of these transactions.
Thank you so much. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, who's the ranking member of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to our witness. In September, President Trump signed an executive order announcing the formal start of the Trump Gold Card Visa program, whereby individuals and corporations can fast-track their U.S. residency process by making a financial contribution to the United States. How are investments related to these so-called golden visas being reviewed by CFIUS for national security implications? And describe in detail what is being done on this issue, please.
Ranking Member Beatty, thank you very much for the question, and I appreciate you having me before the committee today. As you are aware, there is CFIUS confidentiality across any cases that may or may not be part of the committee's jurisdiction or under review. So I can't speak to any particular matter. The visa that you're referencing is being overseen by the Commerce Department, so I certainly could refer you to them. But for your awareness, and I'm sure as you know, commerce is a very important part of the committee. And so on any issues that they're overseeing, we'll be working closely with them, and that information will also be shared with the rest of the committee so they can help us identify any national security risks regardless of the matter before them.
Okay, so you don't have anything to do with that at all? Is that what you're basically saying? And I can check with Commerce to see what they would have to say.
I certainly understand and appreciate that, but I can't speak to any.
You can't tell me if you have something to do with it or not? That's a yes or no.
I
understand your point about you can't go into detail, but you could say yes or no that you have something to do with it in your authority or not. So is that a no? Because I'm going to research it more, and I think there might be something that you are looking at, but I'll accept your yes or no.
With all due respect, under my understanding of CFIUS confidentiality, I can't speak to transactions that may or may not be coming through the process.
So you don't know if it's coming through the process or not?
I can't speak to anything with respect to
I'm not asking you to speak about it. I'm simply asking you in your role, is this something that could or would come through your process? That's not violating any confidentiality. I'm not asking you to address talking about it, just if you have any belief or knowledge that it could or may come through you. That's a simple yes or no. I take that as you're not going to answer it. Let me go to my second question. You noted in your opening testimony that pursuant to President Trump's direction, CFIUS is piloting an expedited review process for lower risk transactions. What is the status of this procedure, which is through your jurisdiction? And for the record, a follow-up to Mr. Chairman's question is you can say yes or no, that this will go through the notice and comment period.
Yes, so with respect to the known investor program, I certainly can confirm that process is in an up and running pilot. We anticipate that pilot to go through 2026. We are gathering information and getting lessons learned. And as I did reference before, we do have a request for information that will be coming out soon to get from more information. I would also anticipate that we would be putting out a lot of public guidance associated with that over the course of the year. I know it's an area of specific interest, obviously, for you and for the committee. So we want to be sure that we're not only sharing that information, but also getting as much feedback as we can to make sure it's as efficient as possible.
How long of a period? Is that a 60-day period, a 90-day period of the notice and comment period?
I don't know that we've determined that, but I think it would probably be around 60 days. That would be my guess.
Also, the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act mandates that CFIUS coordinate with allies and partners in information sharing and investment screening efforts. Is CFIUS doing this, and in what ways could the committee improve those efforts?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, the door just opened.
No worries. The Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act mandates that CFIUS coordinate with our allies and partners in information sharing and investment screening efforts. Is CFIUS doing this, and in what ways could the committee improve those efforts?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for repeating it.
No worries.
Yes, the international partner engagement for CFIUS, as I mentioned in my opening statement, is absolutely critical. Over the course of the program, particularly over the last few years, we have had a number of interactions, and it's very routine, with folks around the world to help them to develop their investment screening processes. Some of the countries that we talk with don't have any investment screening. Some only have sort of a smaller version of it. And so we want to share best practices as to what we've learned as well, because not only is it just sharing that information abroad, but there's also a huge benefit to the United States, because any country that we do business with could certainly become an unwitting vector for an adversary.
Thank you. My time is up. Thank you for that detailed response.
Thank you.
I thank the ranking member. I now recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, who is the chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman Davidson, and again, welcome, Mr. Secretary. We heard in opening comments about not wanting to undercut CFIUS's important role due to politicization, but I think many believe that President Biden politicized the CFIUS process when he rejected Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel. In my view, this abuse undermined the national security function of CFIUS and called into question the credibility of the process. I'm glad to see in the last few months that the Trump administration has reversed that decision, and that you've mentioned in your opening statement the importance of the integrity of the system. Can you tell me what steps Treasury has taken to undo that damage and return CFIUS to its impartial national security role?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chairman. So obviously Congress has established a very clear process. And as I mentioned in my opening, CFIUS is celebrating its 50th anniversary, and obviously the laws have been updated over the years, including most recently with FIRMA and now the COINS Act that we have from the NDAA. And it's been a key principle that when we look at a transaction, the entire committee, so you've got experts from all the different agencies looking at these transactions to determine what the potential national security risks are. And those national security risks are a whole host of different things. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about technology and data, and obviously those are some of the large ones. But when we go through the process, we move from the area of identifying the risks to looking at what the potential mitigation strategies or controls will be. It's a standard enterprise risk management process that I've taught in academia prior to this. And that is what is supposed to happen. It is the threat of the potential actor, the vulnerability of the actual transaction, and then what is that risk that we need to control for. And it's a very sort of, I'm opening it as a sort of simple equation. It's obviously much more complicated than that, but that is what the process should be and will certainly continue to be under my leadership.
Well, we'll certainly be watching for that here in the committee in our oversight capacity. Japan's one of our closest allies, no doubt, but CFIUS has still not granted Japan accepted foreign state status. Why do so many of our friendly partner nations remain subject to CFIUS hurdles when Congress gave you a tool to exempt them?
So thank you very much for the question. As you know, right now, the accepted foreign state status is limited to the Five Eyes partners. We certainly are always examining that and looking at opportunities to ensure that we're able to bring in various investment from various countries. I think known investor programs is certainly another way to take a look at that, and we certainly want to advance that. Japan has certainly been a strong ally and partner, and I'm always happy to engage with you in the committee.
Well, I think we should continue the conversation because as the government moves to a more of a partnership, friend-shoring issue and taking the challenge of critical mineral development, the processing of those is unlikely to take place in the U.S., but it's also unlikely to take place in a lot of the Five Eyes member countries, with the exception perhaps of Australia. So I think that kind of business combination is going to be important going forward. On the nations that have sought a consultation with you on developing their own inbound investment screening protocol, could you provide us a list of those countries in the Western Hemisphere that you've consulted with?
So just picking up on your last point about Japan, I know Japan has been increasing their investment screening, and we'll be likely engaging with them to learn more and be as helpful as we can. With respect to the number of countries that we've had in the Western Hemisphere that we've engaged with, I'm happy to circle back to you on that.
That would be helpful, and we're happy to receive that if it needs to be classified in a classified setting. Treasury continues to implement the outbound investment restrictions that were launched by the Biden administration. And just last month, though, it was reported that China was trying to undo the U.S. investment assumption of C.K. Hutchison's ports, which included those at the Panama Canal. That was a major outbound investment championed by the president, and so I'm concerned that it's off track. Could you, in the time I have remaining, we don't have much, so would you respond to me in writing on that subject?
Yes, sir, happy to do so.
Good, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, who's the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pilkerton, last year, it was announced that President Trump's World Liberty Financial completed a deal with MGX, a company based in the United Arab Emirates. The foreign firm invested $2 billion in Binance, a shady Chinese-owned cryptocurrency exchange where Treasury had said, and I quote, allowed money to flow to terrorists, cyber criminals, and child abusers through its platform, quote unquote. To fund the deal, MGX purchased $2 billion of Trump's World Liberty Financial stablecoin, USD1, effectively a hefty foreign investment in Trump's then brand new stablecoin. Further, while it's unclear what role Binance played or continues to play in World Liberty Financial, we do know that the foreign firm has no public headquarters, and the former CEO received a pardon shortly after accepting the Trump stablecoins. Thus, we know that this sounds like a covered transaction between a U.S. business and a foreign person that would require CFIUS review. Did CFIUS receive the required filing from the parties for this significant transaction? Did CFIUS complete a review of the transaction? And if so, what was the outcome?
Ranking Member Waters, thank you very much for the question. Given the fact that there is statutory confidentiality associated with the CFIUS program, I'm not permitted to speak about any matter that may or may not have come through the CFIUS program.
So was the review done?
So with respect to this or any other matter, under the statutory confidentiality, I'm not able to speak to any particular matter.
What I'd like to ask you is, if there was a review of the transaction, could we get a briefing on it here in Financial Services?
I'm happy to have our legislative team work with your staff.
I beg your pardon?
I said I'm happy to have our legislative team work with your staff on this.
You will have them do the give us the briefing?
I will certainly ask my legislative team to engage with your staff on this matter.
Who has the authority to make sure that they do it? You said you would ask, what if you get a no?
I will talk to my legislative team, and I will certainly have them engage with your staff on this matter.
You will do that?
I absolutely will speak.
Let the record record such. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have another question I'd like to ask you at this point. If I can just identify where that question is. I thank you for being here. As you know, Congress passed the outbound investment legislation in the most recent National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. It included language that provided exemptions that limit the coverage of passive U.S. financial investments in Chinese technology firms and sectors. This is despite numerous studies, for example, from the Morgan Stanley, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, and the Coalition for a Prosperous America that show that U.S. firms have billions passively invested in Chinese companies, including Chinese military industrial complex companies. Thus, how does Treasury access whether U.S. funds, particularly retirement funds, such as those managing public sector pensions for teachers, first responders, and other American workers, are being invested, unbeknownst to the individual Americans, in companies that support adversarial governments or their defense sectors?
Thank you very much for the question. The outbound program is something, as you know, that is relatively new over the course of the last year. Treasury has issued regulations around this, but given the fact that there are certainly other ongoing questions, we also have a number of frequently asked questions that are on the website. And now we have the COINS Act that we'll be able to regulate and administer, and we would anticipate that that would be a new regulatory regime. In other words, new rules will be written, and that will certainly go through the notice and comment process. I think the most important thing, maybe gets at the core of your question, is that people have a level of predictability when they're making investments, and there's very clear guidelines, particularly around the national security risks that you highlight and you mentioned. So when we look at China, when we look at some of the other nations that are identified in the COINS Act, those are areas that we'll be looking at very closely, and we'll continue to get information out there to the public and work with this committee.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, who is also the chairman of the Task Force on Monetary Policy, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witness, the Assistant Secretary, for being here today. The topics you deal with are some that I've been concerned about for the better part of a decade. Specifically, the issue of ownership of key agricultural equities like land and infrastructure by foreign adversaries has continued to raise alarm bells across the country. That's why I introduced the Bipartisan Agricultural Risk Review Act to add the Secretary of Agriculture as a permanent member of CFIUS for any transaction relating to the ag industry, and require CFIUS to initiate reviews of threats notified by USDA. Our annual appropriation bills have recognized the need for this language, but we must cement this practice into law. Mr. Secretary, USDA has committed to working across agencies to ensure sensitive ag equities aren't controlled by foreign adversaries. Can you provide Treasury's perspective? How does CFIUS benefit from the Secretary of Agriculture's input? And would it be helpful for the Secretary to be a permanent member for transactions related to ag?
Congressman, thank you very much for that question. So under the Consolidated Appropriations Act, the USDA Secretary is a member of the Committee for Ag-related transactions. And I can tell you that Secretary Rollins is in the room for those conversations. Her staff is very engaged. Deputy Secretary Vaden, I've met with both of them and spent time with them because I know this is an incredibly important issue to them, as it is to Secretary Bessent. In fact, Secretary Bessent and Secretary Rollins signed a memorandum of understanding last year to enhance focus on agricultural land, biotech transactions, transportation, storage, and processing. And Secretary Rollins often says food security is national security, and I certainly agree with that, and her leadership has been very important. So I look forward to working with them very closely on these issues, as well as getting their insight and leadership.
My bill preserves CFIUS's case-by-case approach to ensure that the United States retains a friendly investment climate. Can you expand on Treasury's efforts to attract investment without compromising national security?
Thank you very much for the question. So I think one example of that under the America First investment policy is the known investor program, trying to ensure that we get more information up front so that when we're making these decisions, when the capital is coming through, we have more information about the underlying transaction and the investors. We're also going to be traveling the country and spending time with various communities to ensure folks are aware of CFIUS, aware of the program, aware of the process, and we'll be doing more roundtables and conferences associated with that, and then work very closely with our partners at Commerce and State, who have an international investment mission of bringing FDI back into the United States.
Secretary, we have a patchwork of state laws across the country dealing with the issue of foreign adversary ownership of ag equities. How is the Treasury Department thinking about the interplay between the various state laws and our federal regulations?
Thank you very much for the question, and it's an important one. We work closely with our state partners in implementing our process. And one of the things that I want to be able to do during my tenure as Assistant Secretary is to ensure that state legislators and state chambers of commerce in particular are aware of CFIUS, its role, and its jurisdiction. I can only execute on the laws that this Congress has passed, but I think that information sharing, certainly at a high level, but just understanding processes will be very good for those relationships, and hope to close the loop here.
In Oklahoma, under state law, we have some very strong language dealing with these kind of issues. My state authorities are very enthusiastic about enforcing that. A lot of times they have to be made aware of what's going on in order for them to enforce state law. So this sharing of information is critically important.
If that's an invitation, I humbly accept, sir.
Absolutely. And with that, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. You have perhaps one of the most critical roles when it comes to the future of the economy of this country. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, who is the ranking member of the Task Force on Monetary Policy, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the ranking member for this hearing. I think it's a very important one. And again, I want to thank the witness. We did hear earlier about the politicization of government. I mean, it's ironic because right now, and I'll have much more to say this afternoon at the Monetary Policy Task Force about the politicization of the Justice Department going after Chairman Powell. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. You know, it's almost as they're eating their own. I mean, Chairman Powell's actually a Republican. He's not a Democrat. But I think he's one of the most honest, straightforward people I've ever met. I mean, if there's anyone that's above reproach in the sense of his honesty, I think it's Chairman Powell. And to go after him, to try to force him to be political, I think is horrible and something that's very damaging to our reputation as a nation and certainly to the Justice Department. With all that being said, talking about reputations, Secretary, you have a very sterling one. You come very well regarded by everyone that you've worked with so far, and I was very pleased to see that you were appointed to this position. I know the reason for that is your tremendous Jesuit education and training at Fairfield University. Congratulations for that. But I do want to ask you about the Nippon Steel deal. So there was a reversal, as the chairman said earlier, of that, and I wanted to get your sense why did that happen? Was there politics involved in the overturning of that decision?
Congressman, thank you very much for your question, and thank you for your kind words as well. With respect to Nippon Steel, I am limited under the CFIUS confidentiality requirements as to what I can say, but I would point you to the June executive order that the President set forth, setting through the resolution of the national security risks.
Okay. And I do understand that you are quite limited. I'm an attorney myself, and I do understand confidentiality in those issues. So again, I'll take your word on it, and I'll also follow up with the reference that you gave us. I do want to ask, though, about emerging technologies such as AI, semiconductors, and the biotech are becoming increasingly important in the national security realm. Many of these companies hold large amounts of our personal data. What measures does CFIUS require to ensure that adversarial actors cannot access this sensitive U.S. data, such as our health or biological information?
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman. And what your question is really almost at the core of the program. Emerging technologies are advancing so quickly that this program has a huge responsibility to oversee that, to identify national security risks, and figure out ways to sort of move forward within this space. So FIRMA gave us quite a bit of latitude and authority over a lot of that technology. And there's actually been an expansion of the technology as well in the COINS Act on the outbound side. So when we see a new technology, whether it's AI or quantum, we go through a whole host of protocols We have the entire committee process involved in that, and certainly the experts are looking at that from law enforcement and from the IC. But I take your point that because things are emerging and advancing so quickly, CFIUS has a responsibility to the program, to the administration, to the Congress, and obviously to the country to ensure we're staying ahead of those. So one of my priorities is to double the size of our research team to ensure that we have PhD experts that are working on each of these areas as sort of a technology center of excellence so we can stay ahead of the curve.
Now, but how will you monitor later on for compliance? Because I understand that that's the initial hit. How are you going to be able to monitor it going
Monitor the
forward?
compliance with.
Yes.
So there's a lot of different ways that we can actually look at that. We can look at the different type of protocols that might be around particular technologies. Like, so for example, if you were looking at AI, it's usually a stack of products, looking at the particular products that, you know, an organization may be investing in or what have you. That's a very high-level explanation. But at the end of the day, each of those transactions are going to be reviewed, not just for technology risk, of course, because we're looking 360 all the way across the board, but we need to make sure that we're protecting our country and protecting our homeland on each of
My time is up. I again wanted to congratulate you and wish you good luck.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you very much. And Secretary, we're delighted that you're here. As you can see, this, not just subcommittee, but the members of this committee have important questions, and consider that the job that you and your team does is very important. You earlier received a question from my colleague, Mr. Lucas. I'm from Waco, Texas, and have a district that is dominated by agricultural interest and products. And Mr. Lucas has the same. And we have spent a great deal of time attempting to work not only with the state, with the secretary on these sorts of issues from agriculture, but also with you, because you're the beginning point where people have to, as required by law, to talk about the investments they would wish to make. We have, both Frank and I, and I'm sure most members have come to find out that there were some perhaps intended consequences, perhaps unintended consequences about decisions that have been made about foreign ownership of companies and contracts and properties that maybe one would not have seen altogether, except the Chinese or these entities effectively used our capitalist system to go and acquire a number of things. In other words, when they made an investment, they kept going inside our system. Do you track those when someone comes and makes an investment and you decide, well, it looks benign, it looks legitimate, but then they then use our system to go and buy more property, more land, more product?
So thank you very much for the question. The transactions that come through CFIUS are certainly tracked, and when folks come through for additional transactions, that information is obviously reviewed and certainly updated.
So, Secretary, you're suggesting to me that you continue to track them, and they would be required under the law, even though they were originally allowed under the requirements to make a purchase. You're saying that then anytime they further make an investment, that is required under the law?
So I want to be clear, just to go back to what I said, because I just want to make sure I'm absolutely crystal clear on this. When someone comes through on a transaction, there is underlying due diligence conducted on that person or company or what have you. And then if they come through again, then that information is certainly updated, included, and there's information from the intelligence community and law enforcement to support that. With respect to your particular question, I'm certainly happy to engage deeper with you in a different setting.
I would ask that that take place, because I think that that sets in place something that we by and large have not on this side been looking at and tracking, but at some point we figure out. So I'm very available. Mr. Lucas and I are very available, and we would be very pleased to establish that. But I think that this is important for us to understand that when a benign transaction comes in or something we think is benign, that we still understand that. And so I want to thank you. I think I have an additional question, but it is very germane to the question I was asking, so I will wait. If you would please have someone in your organization get in touch with me, I would like to set this up and then ask those questions that are better offline. I want to thank you and your team for the service to this country. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Pilkerton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So CFIUS' authority is granted by Congress is to negotiate, impose, and enforce any national security agreement to mitigate the risks associated with any particular transactions. Looking at your website today, it's essentially what your website says is your role. Do you agree that's the basic scope of CFIUS?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I ask that because I want to follow up on your exchange with Mr. Vargas about the Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel deal. And I want to just focus on public information. I'm not trying to get you into any confidential things you can't disclose. Trump reversed Biden's decision to block the proposed deal between U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel, and he allowed the transaction to proceed on the condition that the parties enter into a national security agreement. The terms of that agreement, which are public, personally grant President Trump veto power over major business decisions, including offshoring of production, changing the investment schedule, their business model, the specific products they make. Furthermore, President Trump is listed by name, again, public information, in U.S. Steel's amended corporate charter filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. What I want to know is what was the process within CFIUS to authorize Donald Trump's name to appear in the filings and give him direct veto powers over major corporate decisions?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. I will reiterate, as you know, that there is CFIUS confidentiality related to my role, which is mandated by Congress. And I know you indicated that you're referencing public information, but I think it's important to lay that foundation. With respect to the decision process that was made there, that information is contained in the June executive order.
So was CFIUS responsible for that, or was it delegated to a CFIUS member agency?
Once again, I'll have to rely on the confidentiality.
I'm not asking what the decision was. I'm asking who made the decision. Was it made in your office, or was it not made in your office?
The confidentiality provisions of CFIUS set forth by Congress are very broad, so I'm not in a position to be able to speak to that.
I'm sorry that you feel the need to evade. Can you then point to any prior cases where CFIUS authorized the president to exercise a direct role over a private company's operations?
So in my role, having been in this role for about a week, once again, can't speak to any particular case.
So over the entire history of CFIUS.
What I would like to say, if I may, is that as part of mitigation agreements, there are, from time to time, veto rights on certain types of things.
Well,
that occur.
but
So
let's
it's
be
not-
clear, the president as an individual is named. I'm asking if there's any precedent for that in the history of CFIUS. Because according to Stephen Heifetz, former CFIUS attorney, he said that this is unprecedented. Do you disagree with Mr. Heifetz?
Without seeing the actual document that you're talking about, I can't speak to that. But I will just say that there is a CFIUS confidentiality component here, and I'm unable to speak.
Okay, is CFIUS considering any other agreements that have these golden share provisions?
So with respect to the statutory confidentiality that's required, I'm unable to speak to any particular matters that are going
So
through or
for
not going through
for
the
all
process.
we know, you're and you can't say that they are not looking to commingle the personal interests of President Trump and the interests of private sector economies. You can't affirmatively say that's not happening.
Sir, that's not what I said.
I
cannot
asked,
speak to-
are there any other golden share agreements where President Trump would be named and would be named in SEC filings that you are reviewing? Yes, no, or you can't say.
Under the confidentiality requirements, I can't speak to any particular case.
Okay, well, let's talk more philosophically then, because this isn't a one-off. last year, the Trump administration acquired a 10% stake in Intel, making the U.S. government their largest shareholder. That is not the Republican Party that I thought I knew. I think when the government takes control of private entities, it's called socialism. Setting aside what Trump may do, that creates a massive conflict of interest for any future administration, because simply the act of trying to unwind that could put huge downward pressure, threatening to unwind that could put huge downward pressure on their share price. You used to be the compliance officer at JP Morgan. What is your message as you sit here today to corporate boards who put an emphasis on regulatory compliance, who like the rule of law, who would like to be independent of the government? And they're confronted with the threat of direct government action because as you sit here, you cannot tell us whether President Trump is going to do this again.
Congressman, I certainly appreciate the question. And I certainly believe very strongly in regulatory compliance, very strongly in the rule of law. When it comes to the particular matter that you're talking about, I would refer you to the Department of Commerce and the team there that worked on that matter.
I'm extremely disappointed in your answer. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, who's the chairman for our subcommittee on financial institutions, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Secretary Pilkerton, thank you for your service to the country. Congratulations on your appointment to this important assignment. As of early 2026, President Trump had announced up to $9 trillion in total foreign direct investment commitments that he negotiated. Just as an example, UAE, $1.4 trillion investment framework. Qatar, $1.2 trillion. Japan, $550 billion in key industries, including energy and AI infrastructure investments. Saudi Arabia, $600 billion investments in trade over 4 years, later expanded to almost $1 trillion. South Korea pledged $350 billion in investment with an additional commitment to purchase $100 billion in U.S. energy products. The president has been remarkably successful in just 12 months' time to negotiate massive amounts of foreign direct investment in the United States. Consistent with that, I applaud your office's known investor program. How important is it that as you fulfill your national security obligations implementing CFIUS, that we keep this open investment climate, especially with respect to these key investments that President Trump has negotiated?
Congressman, thank you very much for your question, and thank you for your leadership on the recent outbound legislation as well. With respect to this question, I think it's incredibly important. The America First investment policy made it very clear that while national security is going to remain a priority, America is open for business. And America is open for business in a whole host of areas. You talk about the technology pieces, AI and quantum and other areas, but we really want to bring in business from all different areas, because obviously the benefit to that is not just to those business, to America itself, but to those communities, jobs, research and development. Obviously, there's a whole host of things. So when it comes to that money that's actually coming in, I see it as part of my responsibility to ensure that the program is in place, whether it's known investor or the standard CFIUS program, has all of the efficiencies that money, assuming that it passes the national security protocols, is able to come into the country and be put to work.
Well, thank you. And at the end of last year, as you just noted, the president signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act, which included my legislation, the Comprehensive Outbound Investment National Security, or COINS Act, also known as the Fight China Act, the Foreign Investment Guardrails to Help Thwart China Act. The COINS Act ensures that Americans are not unknowingly funding the military-industrial complex of our adversaries by codifying and enhancing the Trump administration's America First investment policy and the Outbound Investment Security Program. Your office, the Office of Investment Security, is responsible for implementing the statute and overseeing the prohibition and notification investments into certain sensitive technologies. Treasury released FAQs at the end of last year expressing awareness of the new obligations under the law. Under those FAQs, you have 450 days after enactment to issue regulations. What is your time frame?
So thank you for the question. Well, 450 days is what we have, and I've been on the job about 8. But I have met with the team, and we are looking at that very closely. As I mentioned before, the regulatory process for this will be full notice and comment. Of course, there will be overlap from the regs that are in place. But based on your leadership and the work of folks around this committee, there are new components to this program, including new technologies.
I've got
so we'll be getting a lot of information out
Let
there.
me just move on real quick. The sanctions title and the list coordination provisions are administered by OFAC. You have the notification and prohibitions on sensitive technologies piece. How will you collaborate with OFAC on implementation of coins?
So with respect to that language, we are examining that very closely. We coordinate with OFAC in our day-to-day work, as you know, and we'll continue to do that closely through this process.
Thank you. Meta is currently trying to acquire Singapore-based Chinese-founded Manus, an artificial intelligence startup. Earlier this year, BlackRock backed the acquisition of key ports in the Panama Canal. Both of these acquisitions are examples of outbound investments that actually promote U.S. national security and competitiveness. Fortunately, Section 8521 of the NDAA includes a national interest exemption that states, quote, the Secretary is authorized to exempt from prohibition any activity determined by the President to be in the national interest of the United States. While I recognize Treasury still needs to go through rulemaking, do you agree that there are national security benefits of certain outbound investments, and will you aim to be certain that the program is designed properly so we don't inhibit outbound investments that advance our national security?
I certainly agree with that, Congressman. I think that there are certain investments that obviously we have to assess everything for national security concern, as you know. But if there are investments that pass muster on those and present opportunities and provide benefits to the American people, once again, with the national security constraints in mind, then I think there's certainly a lot of benefit to that.
I've run out of time, but our intention in this bill was red light, green light. We embedded in the process a process for non-binding feedback to investors so that they're given certainty and clarity about what's permitted and what's prohibited. Not a question, just a commentary on legislative intent here. We hope you provide investors with that red light, green light.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. The gentleman from Illinois, Dr. Foster, who's also the ranking member of the Financial Institutions Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Assistant Secretary Pilkington. At the core of CFIUS's work is it's being able to understand who the beneficial owner of a covered transaction is and whether they or their affiliates have interests that run counter to the security of our country. And this work requires significant due diligence that I believe was undermined by this administration's move to gut the Corporate Transparency Act, which aimed to crack down on anonymous shell companies that conceal the true beneficiaries of businesses operating in the United States. Now, identifying the interests of businesses is going to become more difficult and more important with advances in artificial intelligence. And specifically Agentic AI, which is coming at us fast and is going to really dominate the next decade in financial services, has become a primary concern of mine. We're going to, we've grown tolerant of the use of shell companies to conceal ownership within limits. But historically, there's always been a human in the loop somewhere down the line. And now we're going to have money flying around under the control of AI agents, signing contracts, doing deals at the speed of AI. And so other countries are looking at this, and we're starting to see international work developing the standards for communications and conversations and contracts between AI agents. And every country, every advanced country except the United States has an understanding that when my agent contacts your agent, they will exchange information about who the legally traceable human is that's responsible for that agent's actions. And so how is this going to work if the answer you get back, well, I'm an agent and I'm working for an anonymous shell corporation and I'm not going to tell you who's behind it? Isn't that going to just make the United States not a player in this new ecosystem? How do you intend to handle that problem?
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman. Over the course of the CFIUS process, as I mentioned, we have a number of committee members, many of the larger cabinet agencies, but we also work very closely with the intelligence community and law enforcement, and of course have access to a variety of different databases associated with that. So regardless, the CFIUS process will continue to be diligent, continue to be thorough and fulsome. So with respect to our work, we will move forward to identify national security risks of the investors of those companies, as well as the transaction itself.
But how is that even going to work in real time? If someone from EU and Korea or Japan wants to engage in an agentic transaction, they get out their cell phone and they say, here is my legally traceable identity, and you do your biometric login, and they present a secure digital ID that every citizen of the EU is going to have, I think, by the end of this year. Every citizen of the UK, every citizen of Korea and Japan have had for more than a decade, I believe. And so we don't have that. What we have is a hodgepodge of a handful of states that are getting mobile ID, digital driver's licenses, and that's the best we have. And so as a result, it seems like we're really going to not be able to play in the next stage of development, because no one is going to trust any agent that's unwilling to say, here is the legally traceable human behind the deal I'm offering you. And so I urge you to have a look at this and try to get ahead of the curve on this whole operation, because it's going to be important, and it will be a huge, it'll be a competitive disadvantage to the United States if we don't have a way of actually understanding, who authorized some agent and who is going to take responsibility for that agent's action, because this is going to be the dominant activity in financial services. And let's see, can we expect, actually, on the specific issue of privacy preserving secure digital credentials, this is something the Biden administration came in and promised they'd do something to move the ball forward. Do you have any insight into what the plan of this administration is going to be doing in terms of giving U.S. citizens the ability to prove they are who they say they are online? Is that on the agenda?
So with respect to data and privacy information that come through the CFIUS process, that's one of our highest levels of concern, and that was outlined in FIRMA. And we conduct analyses and put together processes and procedures to ensure that that data is protected. But once again, that's through the CFIUS process. It appears your question may be alluding to some other agencies, perhaps DHS or others, and I can't speak to that.
Okay, but I just, when our agents start talking to each other and doing deals, you can't convene a committee to figure out even who the principals are in the deal. You have to have standards, and so you should get involved in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Foster. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, who's also the chairman of the Small Business Committee, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pilkington, thank you for being here today. The United States has long benefited from being the world's top destination for foreign investment, and that openness has helped drive jobs, innovation, and economic growth. And at the same time, we face increasingly sophisticated threats from adversarial nations that seek to exploit our openness to gain a strategic advantage. Now, getting the balance right is critical. We've talked about that much today, but both for our security and our competitiveness. And Mr. Pilkington, how do you balance protecting national security while preserving the United States' reputation as the safest and most attractive power to invest?
Congressman, thank you very much for your question, and thank you for your leadership on small business. The question that you point out is really at the core of President Trump's America First investment policy. As I said in my opening statement, national security will always be the priority of the CFIUS program. But the opportunity to bring in foreign direct investment and share to the world that America is open for business is incredibly important. The way that I can do my part in both of those things is to ensure that the program that we have at CFIUS remains robust, thorough, and understandable to the parties. It's got to be efficient. As I said before, process, process, process. And that process does include the analysis of the risks and the mitigation potentially associated with them. The other thing that I can do is ensure that people understand the process. And so, as I mentioned before, I would like to be able to get out into the communities, talk to the state chambers, as well as travel internationally with our state and commerce partners, and make sure they understand the process so that when they come through it, we can come and have an understanding and a conversation and ensure that it's as efficient as possible as it can be to bring those dollars into the country.
All right. Secondly, CFIUS has been given expanded responsibilities over the past several years, including authority over non-controlling investments in certain real estate transactions, but as foreign investment strategies evolve and threats become more complex, it's important for Congress to understand whether the current framework is keeping pace. So looking ahead, where do you see the biggest gaps in CFIUS authority that Congress may need to address?
At this time, I'm, once again, having been on the job for a week, I'm conducting sort of my own risk assessment of that, working with the team and sort of finding where there may be, potential gaps or things to think about. To date, I feel that the authorities there are strong, and to date, I feel like we have what we need to do our job and look at all the national security risks that are at issue. If at any point I don't, I have absolutely no hesitation to come back to this committee, because I know that there is a lot of nonpartisan interest to help advance this program, and I would certainly engage with both sides of the aisle to advance that.
Thank you. On my last question, I want to discuss the 2017 purchase of a trailer park located to Whiteman Air Force Base. As you know, Whiteman is home to our nation's B-2 stealth bomber fleet, one of the most sensitive and strategically important assets in the U.S. military. The acquisition of a property that is less than 1 mile away from Whiteman's runway raises serious national security concerns, particularly given the potential for persistent surveillance, intelligence collection, or interference with base operations. So quickly, this is a property is reportedly one of several properties that have been purchased by individuals with alleged ties to the CCP intelligence. So question is, Mr. Pinkerton, without commenting specifically, is this the kind of transaction that CFIUS would typically want to review for national security purposes?
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman. As you identified, I can't speak to any specific type of transaction, but protecting our national security where transactions are close to military bases or sensitive sites is another priority for CFIUS. In fact, the NDAA had a component entitled Protect Our Bases Act. And so those are things that we are doing. We will certainly implement that law and work through the CFIUS process, but it is critical that we protect the sensitive sites, including military bases of our country.
Absolutely. I yield my time back. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Another gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pilkington, for being here with us this morning. Mr. Pilkington, foreign investment plays a major role in the great state of Texas, as you may know. We're a deeply integrated cross-border region economically, culturally, and financially, with families, businesses, and investors operating on both sides of the border. And while I fully understand and support the Treasury's responsibility to protect national security and combat illicit finance, I'm somewhat concerned that the increasingly punitive or opaque federal actions, whether through CFIUS, reviews, or heightened compliance burdens on banks and financial institutions, or related Treasury tools, will have unintended consequences for communities like ours. Actions like these will discourage legitimate foreign investment and push capital to other countries where the United States has less visibility or leverage. We already have some foreign nationals that normally used our banks moving to Canada and Europe. My question is, how is CFIUS balancing the need to safeguard national security while maintaining an open investment posture for lawful, good faith investments and investors to ensure capital remains in places like Texas and other places around the country?
Thank you, Congressman. And it's an incredibly important question and one that we look at every day. In the America First investment policy by the President, he specifically called out overburdensome mitigation agreements. And these are parties, as you know, that come through the process. We've identified potential risks, and then we work with the parties to determine, are there controls that we can sort of put on this process so that we can mitigate those risks to a point where it's acceptable to the committee. In my experience, I certainly understand and appreciate why those mitigation agreements are necessary, and they will continue to the extent it's applicable and appropriate for a certain act. But as the President has called out the overburdensome piece, I do think we need to pay very close attention to that to ensure that folks that can come through the process and are appropriate to come through the process can do so in an efficient manner. And not just that the process works, but that they're aware of that, right? Because to your point, I want them to be able to take a look at the United States and land in the United States and sort of understand the process, which is one of the reasons that I want to travel.
My concern now is we have banks actually closing foreign deposits, closing the accounts because of the overburdensome policies that have come from this administration and prior. But we need to, I mean, Chase, which is one of the larger banks, just closed, hundreds or thousands of accounts in South Texas from foreign nationals just because they just couldn't deal with the compliance. And these were good, legitimate, solid depositors that had been banking in the United States for a long time. And we're losing them to Canada and Europe and other countries around the world. So I'll be candid, actions taken by this administration make it difficult for me to trust that the current strategy is actually supporting investment and economic stability in border regions. I'd like to ask you to please take a close look at this because it's hurting states like Texas and other places, and it's not in the interest of our country. But what specific steps are being taken to assure, I know you're saying y'all are doing something, what specific steps are being taken to ensure that heightened scrutiny for certain jurisdictions like border states does not inadvertently penalize communities like ours and continue to promote commerce and foreign deposit in American banks? Are y'all doing something strategically targeted for this purpose?
So I would like to make the distinction between sort of a CFIUS transaction and then perhaps the regulatory rules around these that are overseen, certainly by the Treasury Department in coordination with the OCC and others. But those are done in our Office of Domestic Finance. But I'm happy to engage with them and certainly would point you to them as well.
Thank
we
you.
don't
Please
oversee
do so.
some of these issues.
Secondly, we're seeing a very real strategic competition playing out in Latin America, particularly as BRICS countries continue to expand their economic footprint across the region. Even after the United States supported a bailout package for Argentina, we saw Argentina deepen its economic ties with China by exporting soybeans and other commodities there, signaling an alignment with BRIC and undermining American interests. That should be a warning sign for all of us. If our investments posture is perceived as unpredictable or overly restricted or disconnected from regional realities, we risk losing influence, not because we lack capital, but because we lack a coherent strategy that aligns security, economic growth, and partnership. How is this administration integrating its inbound and outbound investment strategies to ensure the U.S. remains the preferred partner in the region, especially for our farmers that are getting killed, just with tariffs and complications and lack of labor? Are we doing something to improve those conditions?
I would just ask that response be in writing. The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Davison and Ranking Member Beatty, for holding today's hearing. And to you, our witness, thank you very much for joining us. While China's investment in U.S. agricultural land has garnered much congressional attention, I'd like to first focus on second-class property purchases, that is, greenfield investments. These are parcels of land that are meant for real estate or industrial manufacturing development, and those greenfield investments near military installations and sensitive sites fall squarely under CFIUS jurisdiction. And in successive reports like U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission, it has stressed the need to review those investments. So, Mr. Pilkington, what is CFIUS procedure for determining which greenfield investments the committee review, both in terms of jurisdiction and in terms of substance?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for that question. CFIUS has jurisdiction over certain greenfield investments via its real estate authority with the purchase and sale of, and leasing rather, of land areas. We are looking at that question very closely. There is some international information around greenfield investments, and we are assessing that to make a determination as to what our authorities would look like in that space to balance the national security risks as well as the open investment posture of the country.
Because China's economic threat has arrived in the mainstream only in recent years, I imagine the United States has neglected the opportunity to evaluate myriad of foreign investments. This leads me to believe that there is substantial time frame for which greenfield investments have not been accounted. Do you believe that there is a reasonable time frame to look back and conduct CFIUS greenfield review that balances both staff resources and national security?
So for transactions that come through CFIUS and have been cleared, they have a certain safe harbor from re-review. That having been said, there can be renegotiation of mitigation agreements and things if there are changed circumstances. But I think to your question, as we look at this greenfield space, we'll be looking to perhaps examine it more closely. But I think another point that you make that's inherent in the question is the idea of non-notified transactions. So if there are transactions that we would have jurisdiction over, so if there are certain technology transactions that may have started or what have you, that's something that the administration is very, very focused on.
Can you tell me in the last year how many greenfield investments CFIUS has looked into?
I don't have that number handy, but I'm happy to get back to you on that.
Okay, well, let's shift gear beyond greenfield investments. I'd like to discuss the implications of Chinese acquisitions of companies that have the potential to damage American interests under CFIUS jurisdiction. Like last year, Epic, it's an education software company that recently declared bankruptcy. That was acquired by Chinese holding company TAL Education Group. I know that I, along with many of my Senate colleagues, have concerns that this acquisition could result in the chance for the CCP to access the students' private data and also conduct the influence operations against the American students. So can you talk about how CFIUS determine which non-notified transactions it should request a declaration from, especially acquisitions of companies that possess the Americans' personal data? That's a great concern for many of us.
No, and I certainly share that concern. While I can't speak to any particular matter, as you're aware, we need to ensure that any transaction that comes through CFIUS, there's no sort of per se prohibition per countries, but we want to ensure that we're constantly evaluating some of our most critical national security risks, and I think data and privacy is one of those. So when we look for non-notified information, when we get information that comes in, it goes through a standard review process to make a determination as to whether it should have gone through CFIUS in the first place. And it kind of goes through that exact same lens that a covered transaction or filing would go through anyway, including the data piece that you mentioned.
Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Secretary Pinkerton, thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate your recent emphasis on protecting the sensitive personal data of Americans. I think CFIUS was prescient and correct in identifying, for example, TikTok and the implicit control of the Chinese government of sensitive personal data of millions of Americans as a potential threat to national security. I know you can't talk about specific cases, but I'm guessing you would also agree that that was a sensible thing for CFIUS to be doing. Is that fair to say?
While I can't speak about a particular case, it is certainly very important to protect privacy data of American people.
In the statutory language that describes CFIUS scope and jurisdiction, describes a focus on any investment by a foreign person in any unaffiliated United States business that, I'm using ellipses, periods here to get to the chase, that maintains or collects sensitive personal data of U.S. citizens that may be exploited in a manner that threatens national security. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, yes.
So I'd like to provide you with a hypothetical, knowing that you cannot discuss a particular case. And I guess before I get there, I understand it is standard practice for you and your staff to engage in confidential briefings with members of Congress, members of this committee, about individual cases. Is that fair?
There's certainly been a history of that in the past, yes.
Okay, you can probably tell I'm building toward that request. I'd like to provide you with a hypothetical. I want you to imagine a conglomerate media company that had the sensitive personal data of more than 100 million Americans, including what you all know is typically collected by many media or online companies around location information, viewing habits, page views, personal financial data, credit cards, et cetera. I want you to imagine that conglomerate also had the ability to use its technology and its outlets to communicate instantly with hundreds of millions of Americans, and that there was a proposed purchase of that American media conglomerate by a group of investors. And among those investors were some foreign entities, including sovereign wealth funds. Now, in the abstract, assuming nothing more, that you knew nothing more, that might be something that would get on CFIUS's radar. Is that fair to say?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. And I certainly appreciate that this scenario is a hypothetical. If there is any scenario that potentially could include national security risks that the CFIUS program would have jurisdiction over, and under FIRMA components of that, maybe data privacy, that would certainly be something that potentially could be under consideration.
I appreciate that, because I'll push the hypothetical a little further and offer that this sovereign wealth fund was controlled by an autocratic ruler that would be investing tens of billions of dollars in equity in this proposed takeover. That autocratic ruler directed the brutal killing of a foreign journalist who worked for an American newspaper in 2018, according to the United States intelligence reports that were published. That autocratic ruler and his nation spies on activists, journalists, and foreign entities using technological tools like Pegasus and Predator, according to independent international reports, various NGOs. And that ruler engaged in a pattern of what Facebook reported to be, quote, coordinated inauthentic behavior in 2019, when Facebook took down 350 of its phony accounts that were used in a mass disinformation campaign to manipulate public behavior. Would any of those kinds of facts be the kinds of facts that would be relevant in consideration of CFIUS exerting its review and perhaps intervention?
Sir, any transaction that comes through CFIUS, we do make an assessment of the parties of the transaction, their history, any other underlying national security risks. So without speaking to any particular scenario, that would be something that would be standard in any transaction that we would see that we would have jurisdiction over.
You might have already suspected I'm referring that particular ruler is Mohammed bin Salman, the head of Saudi Arabia, and obviously they have a sovereign wealth fund that is involved in this proposed takeover of a very important media property in the United States, Warner Brothers Discovery. It's part of the Paramount deal. I know this is far from anywhere near a finish line. I would like to request a confidential briefing of this matter and CFIUS's role, and I have today submitted a letter to the CEO of Paramount, who's involved in that potential takeover, urging them to voluntarily submit to CFIUS and your review, because I think it's a matter of national security. Would you be willing to grant the request for a meeting?
Once again, with respect to confidentiality, I am unable to confirm whether any transaction is or is not part of the CFIUS portfolio, so I'd like to be clear about that. But secondly, I'm happy to have the legislative team at Treasury engage with your staff.
Thank you very much, sir. I yield.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I may, one of our colleagues from the other side, criticized the Trump administration and their 10% stake in Intel, without mentioning the strategic value what role that may play in national security. And so I want to look backwards to an obvious example of precedent. So if you go to late 2008 and 2009, you had the Troubled Asset Relief Program, affectionately known as TARP, where the Treasury took stake in multiple corporations at a time of economic difficulty because it was of strategic value, both from an economic but a national security standpoint. So, for example, General Motors, $50 billion, which was at that time about a 60.8% stake in the company in equities. Chrysler was $12 billion, which was later sold to Fiat, which was a 9.9% stake. Then you look to the financial services industry, which would obviously be the jurisdiction of this committee, where Citigroup and Bank of America received $45 billion in equity purchases, and then AIG had a very complicated structured purchase agreement of $182 billion, which roughly was a 79.9% stake. So there is a historic precedence for Treasury getting involved when it is to the benefit of the United States of America. And failing to mention that, and I serve as the chairman of Homeland Security Cyber Subcommittee, where we deal with these types of conversations on equities and foreign interest and how it affects our country. And obviously, our biggest adversary is China. But that being said, I want to thank the chairman, Mr. Pilkington, for being here. We meet at a defining moment in the global economy, a moment when our prosperity and our security is inseparable. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, is one of the nation's most important lines of defense. Its job is to scrutinize foreign capital that could intentionally or inadvertently undermine American national security. That mission has never been more vital. And again, when you look at the AI and the cyberspace, the interconnectivity here is almost unfathomable. For years, the People's Republic of China has blurred the lines between commercial activity and state power. Unlike Western markets where private companies operate independently of government direction, China's corporate sector exists within a political system that compels the cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party's strategic objectives, Beijing's Made in China 2025 industrial plan. Its dominance of key supply chains from rare earth minerals to semiconductors and its expansive industrial subsidies are all aligned to exploit open economies while denying reciprocal access to ours. This is not a benign investment. It is a long-term strategy to acquire sensitive technologies, critical infrastructure, and intellectual property that can be used to China's advantage in future conflict or economic leverage. At the same time, the Islamic Republic of Iran has repeatedly used opaque corporate structures and front entities to evade sanctions and funnel hard currency into its military and security apparatus. Iran's network of proxies across the Middle East, its sponsorship of terrorism, and its systematic efforts to gain access to Western capital and technology pose a clear and present threat to U.S. interests. Iranian actors have used complex ownership chains to mass control of entities that operate across borders, a strategy that, without vigilant scrutiny, could allow hostile regimes to penetrate or influence American technology and infrastructure markets. CFIUS must remain robust, discerning, and unafraid to use its full statutory authority to scrutinize transactions involving entities tied to these regimes. And I want to underscore, Mr. Chairman, as someone who sits on the cyber subcommittee, I serve as chairman. I spend a lot of time in the SCIF in a classified setting. We are attacked daily by China, by Iran, by North Korea. They want access to our markets. They steal our technologies, and it is imperative that we support CFIUS in its mission. Mr. Secretary, Assistant Secretary, the Chinese Communist Party requires companies under its jurisdiction to cooperate with state intelligence and security services regardless of how these companies present themselves abroad. Given that reality, does CFIUS treat transactions involving Chinese-controlled entities as presumptively high risk, even when those entities claim to be a private or routed through third countries? Sir?
Congressman, thank you for the question. As you know, under the CFIUS program, there is no per se prohibition from a particular country. That having been said, with respect to China, I'm aware of some of the distinct risks that you're talking about. And so I think taking it at a higher level with respect to the impact of things like cyber, like impact on military technologies, intelligence technologies, those areas are particularly important for the committee. And we rely upon the entire committee around the table to help us inform us of those national security risks so we can make a determination as to whether they exist, whether we can mitigate, or whether to prohibit a transaction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Nunn, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for CFIUS for being with us here today. Let me be very clear. The U.S. homeland is not for sale. That means not our military bases, not our family farms, not our key industries. My home state of Iowa has seen agricultural espionage before. Chinese spies were stopped at the Des Moines airport for stealing seeds, literally going to a farm field and pulling them out of a test unit. But because of good work here in the United States, we were able to stop those agents at the Des Moines airport before they fled back to China. Now they can do it blatantly over line. The challenge here is that as I sit on the China Select Committee and understand the CCP's tactics to penetrate the U.S. market and establish a presence here in the United States, we need a CFIUS program that works. And we welcome foreign investment in the United States, but there needs to be a more thorough and transparent process for understanding and addressing the entities of concern. I think of CFIUS like airport security in a lot of very good ways. We want to move legitimate travelers or legitimate investment into the United States successfully while quickly stopping and identifying those threats before they can enter the United States and take root, as I noted with the Chinese. Right now, we're making everyone wait in that same tragically slow line. As a result, I've called on Treasury and CFIUS several times to Congress to review and address the national security issue which we flagged, the Bitman and Kango active in the digital asset space. This is iRobot and other robotics that are now flowing back to Beijing. The challenge here is not only could you have a ROMBA that could map your entire area and report that back, but the very fact that the Chinese are using lawfare to be able to acquire sensitive proprietary information, whether it be corn seeds or robotics, and take that back to replicate inside Beijing. This is a concern that affects all of us. So, Mr. Pilkington, I appreciate your leadership as Assistant Secretary for Investment Security at Treasury. I think members of Congress, we want to make sure that we've got clear insight in the CFIUS review process, particularly where it's most appropriate. I want to ask some specific questions here, and I appreciate the conversation today. Is there a reason that we on the Financial Services Committee can't get updates on our requests, specifically Treasurer's response to my letter about Bitman and the work that CFIUS said is a matter that we can't share anything? Can we get into a skiff? Can we understand what's going on? Can you help provide the clarity to this body so that we can better address legislative solutions with you?
Congressman, I certainly appreciate the question. I'm not familiar with your letter, but happy to engage with our legislative team to come back and speak with your staff. But you raise a couple of really important points that I'd like to speak to, if I may. The first is the engagement of this committee is very important. And as I stated before, the ability to be able to come to you and work with you to see if there are authorities or things that the program might need to be able to ensure that national security remains the number one, and the abilities and processes are in place there is going to be incredibly important. And I feel very strongly that we have that now. You made reference to the agricultural area. Earlier in 2025, Secretary Bessent signed an MOU with Secretary Rollins to focus particularly in areas of ag land, biotech, transportation, storage, and processing. So just for you and your constituents, I want you to know that that's an area I've spoken to Secretary Rollins about personally, Deputy Secretary Baden, and it's very high on our radar, and we're excited to have them as part of the committee for those transactions.
I'm very encouraged to hear that feedback. I think that is a move in the right direction. When we look at, I think there's 330 transactions annually that your team reviews, that is no small accomplishment. At the same time, I want to make sure that there are prioritizations happening within there. I have to assess that CFIA is doing some level of elevation for key things that are really critical to the United States. Can you speak to us on how that process is working now so we can go after these top-tier bad actors first versus looking at everything in a monolithic approach?
Sure. So from a process perspective, going back to your sort of airport analogy, we have the known investor program that is under development. It's still under a pilot. But the idea there is, when we look at the people that are engaged in a transaction and the actual transaction itself, we have to assess both of those components for the national security risk. Our hope and goal is that under the known investor program, we'll be able to get a better understanding of the parties from as much information as we can get now. That will continually be updated, as you would imagine, but that process will be as efficient as possible. We have a very...
I'd like to make sure that we not only encourage this pilot program, but those who want to invest do have a clean, safe pathway to do it, and those who are dangerous are prioritized at the top. This is something we should be working on together. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Nunn. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, I have in my hand a bill styled the Preemption of Real Property Discrimination Act. This legislation would preempt states from producing unacceptable laws related to real property transactions as they relate to persons who may have a foreign background. I'll say more about that at some other time. What's important to say is this. This legislation is legislation that would preempt the 50 states from each having their own laws related to individuals who are from other countries buying property. I'm honored to tell you that the Honorable Judy Chu is a co-lead on this legislation. It was introduced in a previous Congress, and today I plan to introduce it again. 50 states, 50 different laws. CFIUS has the authority to deal with these transactions. 50 states, 50 different laws. Would you kindly explain, sir, whether you think we should have 50 states with 50 different laws? Some may have a ceiling that's quite high. Others may have a floor. Your response, please.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. In the CFIUS program that I have gotten the honor to lead focuses obviously on the federal CFIUS laws. Now, in implementing that program, we work very closely with state actors to ensure we understand their concerns and are able to engage accordingly.
Let me ask you this, sir, if I may. I appreciate your interacting with them, but if it's only an interaction and they are allowed to do whatever they choose, we still have 50 states with the ability to promulgate 50 different laws.
And thank you very much for that question. And I just wanted to finish up saying that I not only will be engaging with the states, but also with the chambers of commerce so they understand the federal CFIUS program. With respect to the CFIUS program that I lead, I can only execute the laws on the federal side. I have not seen your legislation, but obviously
I'll be
focus
proud
on what I can do.
I'll be proud to have you review it. But 50 states with 50 different laws is unacceptable. I think we need to preempt. CFIUS should have the authority to do this. And if we need additional laws other than what I'll be introducing along with the Honorable Judy Chu, I'll be more than pleased to look at producing the laws to do this. This would undermine CFIUS to have these 50 states engaging in this process at will. But there's something more sinister that's taking place right now. It creates xenophobia when a state like Texas produces its law and you are relying on realtors to enforce the law. There's a certain amount of xenophobia that's taking place. And people are worried about their ability to engage in a legal transaction. I'm going to give you a vignette that I have a personal relationship with. I buy property, and I was purchasing a piece of property and dealing with the typical methodology by which one makes the purchase. And at the closing, the persons who were assisting us wanted me to sign a document indicating that the seller is not a foreign national. I don't know the seller's origin. I know nothing about the seller. As a matter of fact, never met the man. It was a man. Never met him. But somehow there was an expectation that I would sign a document saying that he was not a foreign national. That's the kind of confusion that these laws can create because people are desiring to be law-abiding and make sure that they do that which is within the law. I'm a very strong believer and advocate for equality, liberty, and justice for all as we extol it in the Pledge of Allegiance. This behavior of allowing 50 different states to produce laws comparable to what we have in Texas is unacceptable. I think this bill is going to be very helpful. And finally, Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me this second to say this. I support protecting our military installations, but I don't think we have to produce a law that will allow an American citizen to buy that land and prevent a foreign person. I want to protect us from anyone living near those sensitive sites. Doesn't matter to me where you're from. It's a sensitive site that I judge. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. All times for questions has expired. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary Pilkington, for your testimony today. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness to the chairman. Questions will be forwarded to the witness for his response. Assistant Secretary Pilkington, please respond no later than February 18th if we get those to you. And this hearing stands adjourned.